and backgrounds. So, as I promised before, I said that from the table we built, that we're going to add borders to the table. Initially when we built the table, there were no borders, nothing demarcating the cells. Everything was just looking joined together. So here we'll be seeing the table borders also in this class. So for today's content, the first section we have HTML borders. So under that we have what is HTML border. Here we'll define what HTML border is. We'll know how it works, and also we'll look into the syntax, that's the entire coding of the HTML border, and we'll also dive into a quick demo on how the border attribute is used. So also in the next section, which is the HTML background, we'll be looking at what is HTML background, HTML background and its syntax. Then we'll go into a quick demo on HTML background color attributes. Now, the HTML background is divided into two types of attributes, which are namely the color attributes and the image attributes. So we'll look into both of them, their syntax, and how they are used within the HTML document. So I hope you all are ready for this. So yeah, the first section, HTML borders. What is HTML border? So the HTML border is an attribute that is used to create visible lines when used within HTML elements. So from what we've been learning so far with HTML elements, the heading tags, the paragraph tags, each of these tags can actually have a border around the text. That means when rendered on the browser. And so the border attribute is what makes that happen. And most of it is done with CSS, but for the sake of this class, we wouldn't be diving into that yet until next week. So for now, we'll just be dealing with the HTML border attributes. So like I said, it's used to create visible borders when used within HTML elements. So now the border attribute is supported within tables, images, and object elements. So as I said before, the paragraph tags, the heading tags, and some of these other tags, they can also have borders. But then their own borders can only be gotten from CSS styling. So that basically means that the HTML border attributes and the CSS border styling are quite different. So as for the border attributes, it is only supported within tables, images, and object elements, just these three. It doesn't cut across anchor tags, paragraphs, heading, or any form of text or any other kind of element. So for now, we'll just focus on the border attributes with these three elements it supports. Also, we have the syntax, as you can see on the screen. Within the syntax, you can see that the three elements, they are all multi-tags, and you can see that the syntax doesn't really have the it has the tag name, which represents, it could be a table tag, image tag, or an object tag. And so we can also see the border attributes, and you can see that it is assigned a value. So this value that you see on the screen actually denotes a particular integer. By integer, I mean from numbers 1 and anything greater than that, that's 1, 2, 3, 4 to the end. So these numbers actually determine how thick the border would be. So you would expect that if the border is assigned the value 1, it would have the least thick border. And if it assigns anything greater than that, the border would only get thicker and thicker and so on. Yes, so like I said before, we'll dive into a quick demo on how the border attribute is used. So for this, I'll be using the VS Code editor and I'll be starting from scratch. So open VS Code. So before we move on, the border attribute, we are going to, use it within each of these three elements. That's the table, the image, and the object element. So you are going to see how it works with all of them. So I would open the folder for this class. Okay, so we have this here. So for this quick demo, I would create a new HTML file. So we'll call this borders.html. Yeah. So I hope we all know how to use the boilerplate. You just simply need to press shift and number one on the keyboard, then it would show this exclamation mark and you press enter and you get the boilerplate. But for those who don't know how to do that, we can also, start writing this afresh. Type HTML. We'll have the HTML tag. That is, you know what follows the head and the body. Then within the head tag, we'll have the meta tag, just one as usual. And next, we'll have the title tag. So we'll call this HTML border. Yeah. So next, we'll be adding comments to show each of these elements. So we are not going to mix up the codes together. The comments will be used to describe, a section of the elements that we are working on. So for this, we'd have the very first comment, which would be for, let's start with the table elements. So this will be HTML border for tables. Yeah. So I believe we all know how to create a table from last week's class. But for the sake of those that weren't there, I'll be creating the table again from the scratch. So we'll start with the table tag. Next, we'll have the table head and the table body. So within the table head, we'll have the headings of the table, but then we'll also have the TR tag, which is to
Guys should
connote.
turn off your camera now.
Okay, sorry for those who have their cameras turned on, please turn it off so that the bandwidth would, be better in what I'm doing. So, like I said, we'd have the TR tag, which connotes that, the headings will be in a row format. So, within the TR tag, we have the headers, which are connoted as TH. So, we'd have three headers for this exercise. So the very first header would have first name, as we did last week.
Sorry, can you share your screen, please?
Okay. Okay. So I hope you all are seeing the screen. And for those who have their cameras turned on, please turn it off so that the experience here will be better. So back to the VS Code. So I'm going through how to create a table as we did in last week's class. Only difference is for this exercise we'll be adding borders to the table using the HTML border attribute. So let's move on. And the last th, email. So these are the table headers for the entire table. So going to the body also, the tr tag. Within this, we would have the tb tag, which is for the table data. That means the actual content of the table. So here we'd have some random names. So we're going to duplicate this table row tag, copy. So we just change the contents within the duplicated tags. Amy Johnson. Okay, last one. Sam. Yes. W. So yes, we have the complete table built. So now let's see how it looks like without the border attribute. So it's going to look exactly the same way we had it from last week's class. So if we save this and open with live server, yeah. So this is how the table looks like with no borders attached to it. So let's go back to our VS Code. Then within the table tag, we're going to add the border attribute and we'll set it to a value. So let's start with the list value, which is 1. If you save this and go back to the browser, you can see that now the table has borders around it. That means every cell has its own space and it creates a margin with the next cell. So no two cells are touching each other. That means that is both from the left and the right side, and also from top to bottom. No two cells are coming in contact with each other. There is an equal margin within around each cell. So you can see the difference now within the difference with this as to what we had in the last time we talked about tables. So now we are going to increase the value for the table. Let's make it 10. Go back. So now you can see there's a difference. So like I said earlier, the higher the value, the more the thickness of the border But from this, you can notice that the thickness of the border is only affected from the outside border and not from the ones inside. So the border attributes only at the initial stage, that is when you set it to 1, it affects the entire table. But then any subsequent higher value you put in would only affect the outside border and not the border inside. So you can see now there's a difference between the way it was before. But as for the borders within the table, they remain the same way. So let's go back and try out the border attributes within the remaining two elements. That's the image element and the object element. So we'll write another comment again. Border for, hope we all know what comments are for. They are basically to, describe each sections of your code, and they are not going to be rendered on the browser. The browser ignores it in the whole, rendering. So the border for the image elements. So we have be using the image tag, has the source attribute. Okay, so let's use an image we've used before. That's Lagos underscore pic.jpg. So we'll be adding the height and the weight because the image was really large, when we used it the first time. Width of 300 pixels, the height. So we'd also add the alt, which is a description of the actual image in the event that it doesn't appear on the browser. So someone who doesn't see the image would know what it is depicting. So for this image, I think we have Lagos buses. Yeah. So we save this, open with live server. So now you can see the actual image. It doesn't have a border around it. So let's create a space so it doesn't touch the table. So we'd add the BR tag before the image tag, and would add the border attribute. So border equals to 1. So if we save and go back to our browser, yeah. So now you can see the image has a border around it. And as I said, the higher the value assigned to the border, the more thicker the border would look. So if we do the same by increasing the border to, let's say, 5, we save this. Back to the browser, you can see the browser around the image is now thicker. Like, it's very thick compared to how it was the first time. Yeah, so lastly, we'll be diving into the object attributes. I mean, sorry, the object element. So now I know you might be wondering what the object element is, since I never talked about it, although it's also under the block level elements which appear vertically on the screen, but I never made anything about it. I never talked about it at all. And why is because the object element is used to embed an external resource in the HTML document. So this resource could be a web page, a video, an audio, or a picture. But then the reason why I never really talked about this element was because there were already elements who could do that already in HTML. The object element is what was used before to do it in general, but now HTML has different elements to do that. For instance, from the last class, we learned that the video element could be used to embed a video in an HTML document. Likewise, the audio also, and the image elements can also be used to embed an image. So the object element does the same thing that each of these tags does, but each of them have a specific kind of resource that they can embed. So teaching that, I didn't really think we would need to know this, but for the sake of knowledge, now you know that the object element can be used to embed all these resources within itself, but it is much better to use the particular elements meant for each of these resource. So let's create the object element. We have the object. So for this, we'll be using the image resource also. So we'll use the same image we had in the image tag. So the object element uses the data attributes. So within this attribute, you can have your video file, that's the video name.mp4. You can also have the audio file, which is the audio name.mp3, or you can have the image file, which is the image name plus the extension, which could be a JPEG, PNG, JPEG. So for this, we'll be using the same image we just used. So that would be Lagos underscore PIC dot JPG. Yeah. So that is BR tag, so it doesn't touch the image we have already. And if we save this, you would get the same result as you saw from the image tag. So if we go back to our browser and I scroll down, okay, we didn't add the width and height. Width 300 pixels, height 200 pixels. Yeah. So we save this and go back. Yeah, so you can see that we have exactly the same image and they are both rendered the same way. Nothing is different here. The object just is used to embed any form of external resource. So you could also use this for video or audio. But as I said before, it's always better you use the tag that is already meant for those. That way you have more power to control that resource and more attributes to, help make it organized in the way you want. So let's add the border to the object element. So we'd have border to be 1. Okay, let's just make this 3. So you'd notice after we save this, both image will have borders, but the one with the rendered with the object elements would have a less thicker border than the image element. So we save this and go back to our browser. Yes, so now you have this. They both have borders and they look exactly alike. So let's just make it the same. I'll change the border value to 5. Save, come back, and you see they are exactly the same. Exactly the same. So it's almost difficult for you to tell, someone who sees this, it's hard to tell if it was, rendered with the image tag or the object tag. But like I said before, it's always better you use the tag already meant for that. So as a good coding practice, it's better you use the image element to render images, also the video for video and audio for audio files, you know. So let's continue from where we stopped. So back to the border attributes. So the next section is the HTML background. So the HTML background is basically, the attribute that you use to style the color of your background, or if you want the background to have an image. So if you notice very well, by default, in most of the classes we've had, you would notice that the background of the browser is always white. But now I'll be showing you how to use the HTML background attribute to not only change the color of the background, but to also change the background to an actual image. Yes, so I'm sure you've seen some websites that don't really have colors on the background. Instead, what they have there is an image. It could be a very large image, a small image. Some images on the background are, duplicated. That means if the image size is smaller than the screen, it gets to create another duplicate of itself below the image that is already there. So in this section, we would see how that is possible, within HTML elements. So first and foremost, what is HTML background? The HTML background is an attribute that is used to define the background of an HTML element. So like I said before, the background is what, you know, the surface where the text will be rendered on, or your elements could be rendered on. So the background has two separate attributes that we'll be seeing in this section today. So HTML provides two ways of decorating your HTML document background. They are the HTML background color and the HTML background image. So now the background attribute has two separate ways. Unlike most attributes we've been dealing with, most of them occur in just one way. But now this attribute has two separate and distinct attributes to style the background for you. So first we have the background color, and next we have the background image. So we'll be looking at the background color and we'll be seeing everything about that attributes as we move on. So a quick note, in general, the HTML background is specifically for the body element and the table element. Yes. So now I know many of us might be wondering, we've not added background to some text like our paragraph tags, our heading tags. Some of these text we've not really added any, color to it. And that's because most of those kind of functions are done with CSS and we've not dived into that. So the HTML background is only limited to just the body element and the table element. So for now, don't worry about that. As from next week, we'll dive into CSS properly and you would see how you could even add a background even to a link. Yes, an actual link to another site. You could add a background to it. But for now, this background we are learning about, or we're about to learn about, is for the body element and the table element. So for the sake of this section, we'll be going back to the table we just created before. I'll be touching the background. So HTML background color is where we are now. So the HTML background color method uses the BG color attribute to define the color of an HTML element, particularly the body and the table elements. Yeah. So as I said before, the HTML background color attribute is just limited to the body and the table. So by that I mean if you should apply it to any other element, it's not going to work. It's not. So next we'd look at the syntax, and as you can see from the syntax, both the table and the body elements are multi-tags. And you can also see that the attribute is in red ink, and the attribute is assigned a different kind of value which is known as the color value. So now the color value is quite unique. It's not like most values you touched before. Most values we've dealt with are either text or numbers. But then we'll be seeing these color values and the formats of each of these color attributes, I mean values, because the color value doesn't occur in just one format, it occurs in multiple formats, about three of them. So we'll be seeing that in the next slide. So yeah, a quick note. The color value is of three different formats, which are namely the color name format, the RGB format, by that they mean the red, green, blue format, and also the hex value format, that's the hexadecimal value format. Now, I know that the format many of us, are conversant with is the color name format, which is basically represented by the name of the color. You know, you probably want a red color, you would use the name red. If you want a blue color, you would use the name blue, or a green color, you use the name green. But the unique thing about the remaining two formats is that the RGB format and the hex value format can be used to get a specific type of color. So as we all know, especially for those who are designers out there, you know that red color has different variants. There's the velvet, there's you know, the wine red color, there's the neon red. So some of these colors cannot really be gotten with the color name format, as the name red is just so specific to red in general. But then the RGB format and the hexadecimal value format can be used to get a specific type of red, not just red, in line of red, green, blue, yellow, brown, pink. You can get a particular type of this color. So this way it adds more precision to the color that you want, unlike the color name that is just general. So we'll be looking at these three formats and I would explain everything to you in depth. So for the first format, we have the color name format. So this format is represented by making use of the name of a certain color, e.g. red, yellow, and blue. So like I said before, it's something we are already popular with. It's something that we are conversant with. Everybody knows red, yellow, blue, green, and all the other colors. And as you can see from the syntax, this is how you would have it on the HTML document with the tag name, which is basically the body and the table. Then with the background color, assign the color name. So for this syntax, we used red color as an example. That's why you see the BG color is assigned the color of red. So I think this probably the easiest format. But like I said, the limitation of this format is the fact that you can't really get a precise variant of the color you want. Because from what I know of, red color, blue color, green, yellow, pink, orange, all these colors have particular variants. That means you could actually choose how thick you want the color to look like or how light you want that color to look like. And by using the name, you wouldn't get that result. So that's why the remaining two formats, the RGB and the hexadecimal value formats, are very important in styling. Don't worry, we'll see more of this when we get to CSS. This is just like an intro to, styling with colors. So next we have the RGB format. So this format makes use of the combination of red, green, and blue colors. So by this, it actually means that you would have a portion of red, a portion of green, and a portion of blue mixed together to get the precise color you want. Now, each of these color has integer values ranging from 0 to 225. So that means the red has integer values from 0 to 255. The green has its own values like that. And also the blue. So the big question is, how does the combination work? Now let me explain. So you can see that each of them has values ranging from 0 to 25. And the value of 0 actually depicts the lightest variant of that color. So to get the lightest of red, you'll probably be using the value 0. And to get the darkest red color, that would have to be 255. So any number in between, depicts other color variant depending on how thick you want the color to be or how light you want the color to be. So also for green, it has 255 to be the darkest, color variant, and for the blue also. So you can imagine that you would have a combination of integer values ranging within 0 to 25 for each of these colors. So for instance, let's take red as an example. Probably from 0 to 255, we can have, let's not say, let's just get half of 255. So half of 255 is actually 120 something. Yeah, yeah, that's 124, or yeah, 24 or 26 thereabouts. So any integer value lesser than that would actually depict a lighter color, but then the one before that would even be lighter than the color at the middle. And any integer value higher than the middle would actually depict a much more brighter color. So the combination of each integer from the three color is known as the RGB code. So this code is basically gotten from a combination of the integers from these three colors. So if, for instance, like in the first example, we had, the red color. If we were to get a color that is completely red with with no sign of green or blue in it, you would have the RGB format to be 255 for the red. For the green, it would be 0, and for the blue, it would also be 0. So that would give you a pure red color as we had in the very first color format. That's the color name format. So let's look at the syntax. Yes, so this is the syntax of the tag name, and you can see the attribute bg color is assigned an RGB color format. So like I said, the RGB color format is actually depicted as red, green, and blue. So you can see the very first value is 255, which actually depicts the highest red color. That's the thickest red color you could ever have. Is actually assigned this value because it's the highest value along the whole line. Also, you can see green and blue have value 0, 0. So rendering this on the browser, you would see it with a completely bright red color. Like when I mean red, I mean a very solid red color. So the more values you add to the green and blue would actually make this red color to get even, thicker. I mean, sorry, lighter and lighter. But for the sake of this example, we just decided to just, show the red color. That's why you can see with the highest value, and the green and the blue are assigned nothing. So don't worry if you don't understand. When we get to the actual coding, you would see what I mean. So lastly, we have the hex value format. So this format makes use of a hexadecimal representation of colors. So I don't know, I think hexadecimal with a, decimal system in mathematics, it's in base 16. So this format actually makes use of the base 16 representation of this color. So the hex value is made up of a six symbol code. That means six different symbols ranging from alphabets and numbers. And it's also a combination of three groups. So that actually means within this six symbol, there are three groups. So a group has two symbols. So the first two hex values connotes one group, the next two another group, the next two another group. That makes it three group of values and altogether six symbol code. So let's move on. The code can be gotten from a conversion of RGB values to hexadecimal values. Yes. So what this basically means is that the RGB format and the hex value format, they are quite linked together. In fact, the hex value format is obtained by a conversion of the RGB format. So as we saw previously, the RGB format has integer values assigned to each color format, which is the red, green, and blue, and they range from 0 to 255. So in order to get the hex value format from the RGB format, that basically means we would take each integer from the RGB format and convert it to hexadecimal format. And so by doing that, that would mean you would divide the value you have in the RGB format by base 16. It's a thing in mathematics. That's what connotes the hexadecimal. Hexadecimal is in base 16. So you divide each of those integer values for the red, green, and blue color, you divide them by 16, and whatever you get is actually the hex value format. So no need to worry. I don't know if you guys would get the hex value format, because it needs some kind of division, and then decimal values actually 0 to 9. So from 10 you have the symbol A, 11 I think is, 11 is B, 12 is C, 13 is D. For those that know maths, this shouldn't be something difficult for you. Yeah. But if you don't, no problem. I would show how to do that. So also we can see the syntax, and from the syntax you can see the attributes. BG color actually is assigned the hex value format, which starts with a hashtag. So unlike the RGB format starts with RGB, then with a bracket which would hold the value of each of these colors. But for the hex value format, it starts with a hashtag, and then it would have the first hexadecimal value for the red color, the next hexadecimal value for the green color, and then the next hexadecimal value for the blue color. So as I said before, within this six color code are actually three groups. And so you can see that the very first two codes here, which is FF, the FF actually represents the highest hexadecimal value for that color. So you can see that the RGB and the hex value, they are quite the same, but in a way they are not the same, because the RGB format has 255 to be the highest integer for the color, but in the hex value has its own to be in FF, and F actually represents the last digit under the base 16, which is 1515. But you can't have 1515, so it's why it's represented in FF. And also you can see the next two, they have a symbol of 00. That actually means it doesn't have any green color at all. And for the last, you can also see 00, which means there's no blue color at all. So one can tell that this color code actually gives you all red, the same kind of color the last two formats gave you. So you can see that for the first format we have the name of the color red. For the RGB format, we have the RGB code to be 255 for red, which is the highest, and we then have 00 value for green and blue. So that gives you all red also. And now in this format, you can see that the first group, which is the first two symbols, they have the highest symbol under the hexadecimal value format, which is FF. So it gives you the highest of the red, and they have 00 within the green and the blue, which means it gives you no zero, gives you no green or blue color at all. So we'll be applying this, on VS Code very soon, and you would see that they would all still give the same color irrespective of the format we decide to use. So yes, a quick demo on how the background color attribute is used. So let's see how it's used. Let's go back to our VS Code. So we are back to the VS Code. So we'll be applying a color on the body of this document and also on the table. So let's start with the body. So within the body, we would have the BG color attribute. Now let's assign it a name using the color name format. Let's say red. If we save this, open with live server, you can see that the page is completely red, including the table, except for the borders and also the text and the image. The rest of the page is red, like is completely reddish in color. It's red. So let's go back and try to use the next format, which is the RGB color code. So this would be RGB in brackets. So we'd have the highest value of red, which is 255. Would have zero value for green and zero value for blue. But before this, let's just quickly, cancel this and save this so we can see that the color that was there before isn't what we show again. So if we save this now and go back, you can see there's no color on the body on the page. So back to the body element, would add it again. Oh, sorry. So the BG color, the RGB 255, the highest red, 0 for green, 0 for blue. So this should give us the results we had the very first time we used the name format for red. So if we save this and we come back to our web browser, oh, why does this give us a green color? I think there's a mistake. Okay, this 0 255. Let's save this one. Oh, this is blue. Okay, so that means the red color actually comes last in this color code. So this will be 255. And yes, we'd have 0 here. So if we save this, we'd get an all red color. Ah, and even darker blue. How is this possible? Okay, it's like there's a mistake somewhere. But normally we should have this to be all red because the red color actually is the first color value. Okay, let's try this with the hex format and see. We'll have this to be hashtag F F 0000. Save this. Go to live server. Yeah. So this gives us an all red color. Yeah, so you can see that it gives us the same result as the color name format. Wow, I'm really surprised the RGB didn't show red. Let's try again. GB 500. Oh, shows green. Okay, so I think, well, can't say for sure, but this worked yesterday. So, but at least we now know that the color name format, the RGB format, and also the hexadecimal value format could be used to get some, precise type of colors. So let's try another color code, FF, which is the highest for red. Let's have a touch of blue. So we'll have this to be E6. Don't worry about, the symbols. We'll discuss this again in CSS. Let's have this to be also be E6. If we save this, come back. Yeah, now you can see that it gives us a different color. But this color is close to white color, but it's not white. It's actually called white smoke. So you can see it's a little bit pink. It's like a touch of pink on white. It's not very obvious, but then that's how it is. So you can see that with the hexadecimal value format and also the RGB format, you can get some specific type of colors. So for those seeing this screen very well, you would notice that this is not white color. It looks like white. In fact, let's remove it and you would see that there's a difference between this color and white color. So if we take this out and save this, now you can see that this color here is white and the color we had before wasn't white, although it was close to white, but it wasn't a white color. So the hex value format, the RGB, thus are very, very important in getting some specific type of color. That means you can actually get a precise color you want. You can add precision in picking, the colors that you want to be displayed on your HTML document. So I hope we understand the formats of, the BG color, the color name, which is the easiest, the hex, and the RGB. So as for the hex and the RGB, we would also go back to this when we get to CSS. But for now, if you don't really understand how the hex value is gotten, don't worry about it. When we get to CSS, we'll treat this again. And then I would show you how the hex value is gotten from the RGB value. So let's move on. So the next section is the HTML background image. So like I said before, aside from using colors to, apply on the background, you can also use a particular image on the background too. And the HTML background image attributes allows you to do that. So the HTML background image method uses the background attribute to define an image background for a HTML element, particularly body and table elements. So as I said earlier, the HTML background image and the background color. In fact, the HTML background overall is just limited to the body and the table. So it doesn't apply to other elements as other elements now use CSS styling, which is far better than using HTML. So you can see the syntax below. We have the background attributes, and within the background attribute, you can see the value image URL. So this image URL is quite similar to the source attribute, and the background attributes and the source are quite similar here because the image URL is also used to get the location of the actual image you want to put on the background. But the image URL has a different way of doing this. So it's not going to be like your regular source attributes where you just put in the image between the double quotation marks. No, it doesn't work that way here. Here it's quite different, and I would show you how it is done when we get back to VS Code. So yes, a quick demo on how the background image attributes is used. So here you would see how it's used, and we are going to use this attribute within the table elements and the body elements. So let's get back to it. So back to the VS Code. Okay, so I noticed that I didn't add a color, that's the BG color attribute to the table. So let's quickly do that. BG color, say green or no purple. Yeah, so you can see the table has a purple color displayed. So that's why I said the BG color and the BG image, they're actually limited to just table and body elements and not any other elements. So as for those other elements, we'll be styling them when we get to CSS properly. So let's go back to VS Code. So within the body, we are going to have a background image. But first of all, let me rename the image we'll be using. So okay, yeah, we'll be using this image. So I'll rename this because it's really long. Cat.jpg. Yeah, so back to our HTML file, body. So we have the attribute background. Yeah. So within this, like I said before, it's not going to be like the source attributes where we had the image location directly on it. So it's going to be quite different here. So we have the background with URL in brackets, then the name of the actual image or the location. That means that if you don't have the image and the HTML file in the same place. So we have this to be cat.jpg. Save, open with live server. Oh, okay, I think there's something wrong with the syntax. What could it be? This before. Case for the style. It doesn't work. Why? Okay, back to this. Let's see.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah,
I guess it should be background hyphen image.
okay, but from what I checked yesterday, it's actually just the background. Except if you are using, the image styling. Okay, let's see. JPG. This should work. Is it background? Um, this isn't picking this. Okay, but okay, let's try background image. That shouldn't work normally because if we should use that, we'll be going into CSS, which we haven't touched yet. But then with CSS, this would be style equals to background image in the URL. Okay, yeah. So the image is really large, so you probably might not see this well, but you can see the actual image on the background. It's okay, it's too much. Let's use a smaller image. Lagos underscore PICG. Yeah. So if we save this, now, yeah, so you can see we have the image that we used in the image elements and the object elements on the background of this page. So this is how you could actually, change the background of your web page to an image. Yeah, so that's how we do that. So normally the background attribute was meant to work for the image, but I don't know why. But then, like I said before, we've not really gone into CSS yet. So this is like an intro to CSS. By us using this style attributes and assigning the background image to this property called background image. So a quick note on today's class. Now, the background color attribute with the background image attributes and also the HTML border attributes are deprecated. By that, I mean they are unacceptable to HTML5, which is the current version of HTML today. So, what I basically mean by saying that is that we shouldn't try to use these attributes. The only reason why I thought this was because we are still dealing with HTML purely, no CSS. That's the reason why I went into HTML borders and backgrounds. So for the sake of good coding practice, you have to use CSS for proper styling. That's just the truth. The only reason for me teaching this was just because we are still within HTML, and from the curriculum we are not to touch CSS until we get there. So I'm going to be styling this with CSS, which is the proper way to style this. By that I mean I'll be removing both the border attributes, the BG color attributes, and I'll be using CSS to do this properly. So let's quickly do that. So we'll take this out. Yeah, so now if you notice in the border element above, which is this line here, this particular line, we have already used a CSS to do this. And that was because the background image that is under HTML, well, due to some syntax issues, probably we couldn't get it. But now you can see that with CSS, you can actually do this using this format. Yes. So let's get the table borders with CSS, and I would also show you why CSS is more dynamic than using the HTML attributes in terms of styling, not just the borders or backgrounds, but in terms of styling in general. Like CSS just owns that realm of styling. It's not really HTML things. That's why you can see that HTML background and border is just limited to the body and the table element. But with CSS, you have a lot of dynamics with styling your text, your nav bar, your footer, your header. Just name any tag you want. You can style as much as you want. So let me show you what is unique about CSS in terms of styling the borders. So we'd have this to be style, which is the default way to start a CSS. So when we get into CSS, there are three different ways of styling an HTML document. First, we have the inline method, which is what we just did within this body element. By saying style, you would actually start with the attribute of style. Then the next thing you do, you would have the property you want to make changes to from the body element. We can say that the property here is background image, and then after naming the property you want to apply changes on, you will then assign it the value, which is URL. Then within the brackets you have the name of the image. So this is just one method of styling in CSS. So basically, in a nutshell, what we learned today is just for the sake of knowledge and knowing that okay, HTML actually has the color attributes and the background attributes. But by normal coding standard, these attributes are deprecated. That means they are not appreciated anymore ever since CSS, could already do this and more dynamically. So we'll be seeing that within the table elements. So we have the style attribute. Next, we'll have the property we want to, make changes on, which is the border. So we'll have the border. Next, we'll define how thick we want the border to be. So if you notice very well, using the HTML border attributes, you can actually determine that by just an integer value. But for CSS, you would need to add the integer value and also the unit of display. So we'd have the first value to be 1 pixels. I told you, yeah. So said before in a previous class that this pixel is actually a unit of display, but it is not the only unit of display. It's just like the most popular one. So next we'll define how we want the border to look. So we'd have solid, and lastly we would have the color. So if you notice well, we couldn't really change the color of the previous border. I think yeah, it was just black, and as we increased it in thickness, it just kept growing in that black color. But now you can actually define the kind of color you want within this table. So we'll use blue, for instance. Okay, no, I use my favorite, purple. So we'll save this. Going back to the document, okay, we'll take this up, and now you can see it has a purple border around it. Now, the only drawback in CSS is the fact that you need to style the heading element and the table data element. So unlike the HTML table attributes, it just styles the entire table, including the table header and the table data. But CSS doesn't, do that. So CSS only styles the particular element that holds that styling property. So for now, the table element, as we can see in VS Code, yeah, you can see that the table element is the only element within the table that has this style and border with the value 1 pixel solid purple. So to make this appear with the other cells, we would need to reference the table heading and the table data tags. By that I mean these tags and these tags. But then that would actually mean that we would need to put this particular syntax, CSS syntax, would copy it to each of these elements. Yeah, so we'll copy this, and within this we'll have this. Okay, table head, copy this one, share. So we'd have it like this. like this, and we'll also have it like that within each of the TD tags, each of them within the row. So here we have up to 3 rows with 3 TD tags in each. So that's 9 TD tags in total. So we'll be having to type this copy and paste in each TD tag, and trust me, that's quite stressful. So that leads us to the second method of styling with CSS, which we'll be touching as from next week. So that is called the internal styling. And by that I mean we are going to create we are going to style this under the style element, which will be within the head section. So let's remove this or this. Yes. So if you notice very well from most classes we've held, within the head elements we've mostly had the meta and the title elements. But then the head element can also hold the style element, which we can use to actually style our HTML document. So that's the second way of styling. So like I said before, the first way is the inline styling, which we just did within this body element. So now the second way of styling, which is the internal styling, would be to create a style element within the head section. That by that I mean the head element. So we'd have the style, and there you have it, the style element. So unlike before, we just had the meta tags and the title, but now you can have the style there. And so instead of using the inline method to actually attach this style to each th tag and td tag, we can actually reference the th and td tags and would add the styling to it, and it would touch any table that has th and td. So by that I mean, if I let's also remove the one from the table too. So we'll take out the table. Yes, so now you just have pure a pure table with no styling. So let's save this and check, to make sure there's nothing there. Okay, yes, so there's nothing there now. So if we go back to the style section, we'll start with the table. Next, we'll have the table heading, the table data. Also, we'll have curly braces. So the curly braces is actually depicted like this. So within the curly braces is where the style actually goes in. So we'll say the border, that's the same way we had it before. 1 pixel, solid purple. Now before we save this, the results you would see would be quite different from the one we had when we had the style property within the table element. So now this property is going to affect the table headers and the table data. So if I save this and I go back, now you can see it. Let's zoom in a little bit. So now you can see that there are borders around the entire table and they are not in black color, they are in purple color. So you can actually assign these colors like the way we learned today, either with the color name, the RGB color code, or the hex code. So let's use a hex code to do this, and let's also increase the thickness of this color. So we'd make this 5 pixel solid. Yeah, I know the purple color code, so I would use the red hashtag FF0000. So you can see it already shows you the red color here. So the moment you type out the hex code, a small depiction of that color comes out to tell you what you are actually using to style that particular element. So if we save this, we should have a thicker red border. Okay, yes. So as you can see on the screen, this is what CSS can actually do for you. And this is why the CSS is actually more unique and dynamic than using the HTML color attribute. So you can see that you can not only increase the thickness of the color as we could do before, you can also increase the thickness of the internal borders. So the HTML color attribute could only do that for the external border, that's the border surrounding the entire table outside. But now this affects not only the outside but also the inside. And you can also change the color of the border to any color you want. Now, another unique thing about the border here that is quite different from what we learned today under HTML border attributes is the fact that you could also define different style of borders that you want. So you probably might not want a border of just straight lines. You probably want dotted borders. So we go back to VS Code. We would remove this solid. We'll change this to dotted. And when we do this, you would notice a difference. Yes, a huge difference. Not in the color, but in the way the border will appear. So if we save this and go back, now you can see that the border is different from what we had before. So properties like this cannot be done with HTML attributes. That's both the color attributes, the HTML background color, the background image, and also the HTML borders. They can't do, unique styling like this. That's why I said initially that they were actually deprecated. So it's unacceptable by normal coding standards to use, such attributes. It's just better you use CSS. You have more dynamics in terms of styling. You also have a variety of, options to choose from, unlike the attributes from HTML, which can only increase the width, and the increase only affects the external border and doesn't touch the cells or the table data. So let's try another variant of the border appearance. Okay, I think dotted. There's one with lines. Okay, reduce this 2 pixels. Let's go back to solid. Change this gray color. So yeah, so you can actually have any color you want from the borders. You can basically have anything you want. And the border property doesn't just, it's not just under the border itself. It also has other properties attached to you. You can also change, the border radius, other things that are connected with the border. So let's see that border. Yeah. So as you can see on the screen, these are the list of properties you could have with a border that CSS would allow you to manipulate. So first you have the border radius, the border bottom, the border top, border color, border left, right, width, style. There are a lot of them. Probably you might not, use all of this, but this is as much as what CSS can enable you to do with just the border property. So you can imagine that if CSS could have this for just borders, it's definitely going to have much more for other elements and not just table and body. So brace yourselves. We'll be diving into CSS next week, and then we'll be touching not just borders but